Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast. I have with me today a very special guest, as usual. Her name is Linta Mustafa, and she is the founder and CEO of Vitract, actually co-founder. And this is a next generation microbiome test. So I'm so excited to speak to her today. And I want to start a little bit with your journey and what your background was before getting into genetics.
Thank you so much for having me here, Marina. I'm so excited to share this test with your community. So, a little bit about myself. I have a background in genetics and medicine. I was set on the path of going to medical school, becoming a physician. I also was a varsity wrestler. So, I wrestled in university. So you can imagine my schedule, being a varsity athlete and being a medicine student. It's basically the only two things that I did. And I sort of fell into this space because I woke up one day and I had all this inflammation in the joints of my hands. I didn't know what it was, so I immediately went to see the doctor on campus. He took one look at me and he said, "You're so young. I can tell this is not arthritis." Long story short, I spent the next couple of years, a little over 2 years, seeing different rheumatologists, different autoimmune doctors. They said you have something autoimmune in nature, but couldn't really pin down to exactly what it was. And that's what actually was the catalyst for me getting into this space because I didn't want to be on medication for the rest of my life. And I wanted to figure out what other alternatives there were. So I had a little bit of an advantage because I was studying genetics at the time. So I could read through a research paper really quickly and move on to the next. So I started just doing all this research on my own. Ended up finding a great functional medicine doctor and worked with her for over 5 months. And the main goal when I was working with her was she was trying to heal my gut. And that was so fascinating to me at the time because throughout all of my educational career, the gut microbiome was never really brought up. In any of my pre-med classes and any of my genetics courses, it wasn't brought up. And that worked for me. After that intervention, it reversed all of my inflammation. It's been 7 or 8 years now since then. I've been completely off medication and healthy. And so that is what made me really, really passionate about this space and just adopting this lifestyle of taking care of yourself as you go on about living your life. The main thing, though, that stood out to me about that experience was not only was all the care out of pocket, all of the supplements, everything else, but all of the functional testing was out of pocket as well. And I remember as a student saving up for over 3 months to be able to buy the gut test that she wanted to run for me. And so I had kept thinking about this problem. It wasn't until years later that I met my co-founder, who's a PhD in molecular genetics. He's a virologist. He's an expert in phage therapy. He has delved deep into the world of the microbiome and designing very specific interventions that are countering the approach of using antibiotics that can have a lot of negative side effects. So when I met him, we sat down and we were just having a discussion around this space at general when we landed on this problem of the microbiome today is so elusive, right? So yes, we have the problem of testing is so expensive, but then also even when there is testing available, it's so hard to understand what to do, right? Like today, what's really exciting is that we have integrative pharmacists like yourself. We have integrative dermatologists. We have integrative medicine, allopathic medicine doctors, right? But not all of those folks have a deep understanding of microbiology, which is unfortunately kind of what it comes down to in today's world. If you're trying to understand the microbiome, you really have to get a sense of what does this bacteria do? What is the mechanism of action? How does that impact health? So that was our goal, was let's take everything that my co-founder knows and that he's learned from reading hundreds and thousands of papers and all of the new research that's coming out, and then let's translate it into really easy, practical tools that practitioners can use to deliver better care at a better cost. So that's what we've done in short, but excited to be here and share with you guys.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that personal story. I think so many of us can relate, especially those of us that have come from allopathic background and into a more holistic or natural field, like you were mentioning, all these integrative practitioners. And a lot of us do have a personal story and a reason of why we're doing what we're doing. It's not just that we decided, oh, you know what, let me just change my mind and do something different. It's because we found a problem, still persisting, right? That we needed different solutions or a deeper dive and understanding into the problem than what was available with our skills in allopathic medicine, and then there's side effects as well, because a lot of what we do in allopathic medicine is we try to treat the symptoms, which can be helpful from, a relieving suffering perspective. And a lot of it is through medications and chemicals and like modifying biochemical reactions in the body. But we often fail to address the root cause. So that's kind of what you were mentioning, that the gut test was really showing you, is that the microbiome was at the root cause level, showing you at like a downstream effect that you were experiencing in your joints. So before, you took a medication or got treated for arthritis or whatever, it's good that your doctor had the foresight to suggest doing a deeper dive, and that you found the integrative care, and that you also were able to invest into that care because, like you said, because it's not part of the mainstream and conventional, it's not covered by insurance. And it's, unfortunately, a lot of people, if they really do want to get to those root causes, they have to make those decisions to prioritize that and to spend out of pocket money in order to get that resolved. So it's a lot to kind of process, and to a lot of hoops to jump through. But I think it's so key and so important to have these conversations so that more people can start to get the understanding about what really is at those root cause levels. And the microbiome is a huge missing piece of it. And probably like over the last decade or two, we've really started hearing this, word about the microbiome and how it's connected to literally every facet of health. And I even like to connect it as like a microcosm of what's going on in a person. And then a person is also a microcosm of what's going on the planet. So it's like we really have to get truly holistic and understand all these interconnections between what we're doing to ourselves, to the environment, and then how that is all a cycle and how it's all connected truly. So it is really an ecosystem. And I believe like that's where the holistic health movement and industry must go. So I'd love to hear just like a brief description of the microbiome from you, and what your understanding is about how important is the role and how important it is to get the proper testing and evaluation. Because I think, one thing that you mentioned in your story is that that test was really, really key for you, right? But it was just not affordable for a lot of people. So I love that mission of yours. And I would love to also hear your thoughts about like test, don't guess, right? Like how much of it must we test before we give somebody a treatment plan?
Yep. So I'll start. I think what's really important to note in this space is what we know, what we can be confident about talking about, that is evidence-backed by scientific literature, and then what we don't know, because there's stuff in this field that we don't know, right? And I'll start off with that. What we don't know is what a standard healthy microbiome looks like. So Marina, you and I could have different microbiomes, but still be healthy, right? Now, moving on to, and I think what's interesting there is like people with different ethnic backgrounds living in different parts of the world, which is why I thought what you said was so refreshing, and that the way we interact with the world and in our environment is very different depending on where we live, how we experience the world. And so if you look at remote communities, they just have a far more diverse microbiome than if you're living in a big metropolitan city, just a function of your environment. But both of those people can be healthy, right? So what we do know, though, from literature is the signatures of a healthy microbiome. And I'll break that down for you. So the way at looking at the microbiome is by one, understanding the life forms that are living there. And currently, the microbiome is made up of over 96% bacteria, right? So a lot of the times practitioners are really interested in trying to understand and look at, are there roundworms, parasites, etc. But most of the time, because the microbiome is mostly bacteria, it's bacteria that's the culprit. So when we were designing this test, we really designed this test to be the best test that you can find to figure out bacterial gut dysbiosis. So this is our first test. We don't show other life forms, we really focus on bacteria. So the two main things when we look at the microbiome is one, what is living there? And then two, what are they producing, right? Because what happens is as you consume different types of foods, they send different signals to the body. And the reason for that is different types of bacteria have a preference for consuming different types of foods. So then what you eat actually decides what type of microbial community is actually starting to form and live together and create this sort of symbiosis environment that your gut that makes up your gut flora. So our test is split up into three different parts. The first section is the life form sections, where we talk about all of the keystone probiotics that should be in the microbiome. Then we talk about the commensals. These are bacteria that essentially keep the homeostasis of the gut. And then the third thing that we talk about are pathobionts. Pathobionts are quote unquote bad bacteria that exist in the gut, but it's normal for them to exist in the gut flora as long as they're present in low quantities. And then the last thing that you have is exogenous pathogens. So these are like your Shigellas, your Salmonellas, H. pylori, things that should not be there at all. And then if those come up, it just shows as detected or not detected. So this in itself, this is if I was a practitioner, I would be looking at getting a sense of, does my patient have enough of their short-chain fatty acid producers? Do they have these keystone species in the right amounts, right? And it becomes really clear when you start looking at patient test results. Sometimes you have 0% Akkermansia or 0% Bifidobacterium or Rosaboria, and then okay, this person is not actually producing a lot of short-chain fatty acids. And then you look at their pathogenic section, and then you say, okay, they have certain pathogens that are like Bacteroides, for example, that are present in very high quantities, or Methanobacter, meaning they are producing a lot of methane, or they have a lot of LPS producers. And then once you piece that together, you can figure out, okay, if you have this perfect cocktail of a patient where they're producing a lot of LPS, that is going to go then try to actually break the intestinal barrier that we have. But then you don't have the short chain fatty acids that line that gut lining to actually prevent that from happening. It's the perfect storm to sort of create leaky gut. So these are the kind of things that we try to help practitioners understand. The second section is focused on really interesting insight in, do you have bacteria that are known to produce different things? And these different things can be your B vitamins, your neurotransmitters. This is a really interesting one. Your oxalate degraders, your lactose degraders, all of these really interesting things that we know now from literature what the function is of these different bugs that live there. So we give you insight into those things. And then the last section, and this one we're really proud of because this was really hard to put together, was the bacterial modifier section, right? And I think this is where a lot of tests are lacking, is they'll sort of take a screenshot of the microbiome for you, but they don't really have a robust engine that can help you figure out what to do with that information, right? It's really hard for a practitioner to know, okay, I have a patient and they have very low amounts of Akkermansia, but they might not know that cranberries, for example, or strawberries, when taken in certain amounts, specifically feed Akkermansia, right? So what we tried to do was, in that last section, we take everything from your test result that was out of range, and then we give you different types of modifiers that you can use to move things in the right direction, whether that's up or down. And these things are nutrition. That's what we really focus on. but they're also come in the form of prebiotics, probiotics, and supplements and lifestyle interventions.
Yeah, I was really impressed because I actually got the opportunity to use this test, and now I've started using it with clients as well. So I was really impressed with the way that you just described were the sections of the test, and then also the interventions. Like you said, it's not like product centric, and it's not even just bacteria centric. Like it actually tells you, the lifestyle and the food approach to address it. Because like we were saying before, yes, the microbiome shows you the root cause disbalances, and there's something that's even deeper at the root cause that is having your microbiome look a certain way, right? So those are the deeper things that we need to address, like stress, like lifestyle, like sleep, like what foods we're eating. And those are the interventions besides introducing specific species that we can also be utilizing in a treatment plan.
Mhm.
So I want to back it up just a little bit for our audience that may not be familiar with the microbiome. And so let's just define what it is and what can mess it up and how it's relevant to all parts of the body.
Yeah. So think about your microbiome as a jungle. You have different life forms that live all together harmoniously, and they kind of work together to keep certain things in check, right? So the microbiome has only a finite amount of information of space, meaning only a certain amount of life forms can be present there. Meaning, if you have a certain bacteria or bacterial species that's totally overgrown, it means that there's just less space for other life forms and bacteria to live there. Or it could be your archaea, whatever else that live in the microbiome. So think about it as a sort of a space where different life forms exist and they help you process and break down different foods and different chemical signals from your environment. And then they in turn produce metabolites that then actually have a lot of different downstream effects on your health. And these metabolites that they produce can be anywhere from neurotransmitters, vitamins, different bioregulators, different forms of metabolites that other life forms need to exist. So it's a very complex system that all works together. But I think what's really fascinating in today's environment is we know so much about the microbiome. And I think, so to give you an example, 2,000 research papers come out in the microbiome space every single month. There is a litany of scientific evidence. And I think the challenge in today's world is not that we don't know enough, but how can we take all this information and actually put it to work?
Yeah, so like sifting through it and drawing conclusions and parallels from that information. And I'll have to say that today we have an evidence-based model, which is great, right? And it makes sense and it's logical. And also, it's sort of inherently has some biases, right? Like we've known about publication bias and, confirmation bias and like all this other kind of stuff. And so you can literally probably find literature for whatever it is that you're looking for. You can find literature
Yeah.
that will probably support and back your claim. And at the same time, when we're looking at all of it, and now using, I think your system uses an AI-backed model, right, to sift through the literature and like get information from all of the sources, which kind of decreases the bias a little bit because now you're looking not just at one study, but you're pooling all this data and then you're trying to see what is in common, what's a common thread among all of them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think you're bringing up a really interesting point is there is an art to designing an engine that does not have biases. And so the way that we do it is we have a team of PhDs that are in charge of taking everything that comes out of the AI model and reading every single paper. So the reason we employ these AI models is to save time, but in the end, the way our system works is we have we have everyone read the papers because I think AI is accurate like 90% of the time, but it still misses information. It still has inherent biases. I think if you look at different AI engines, you look at ChatGPT, you look at other models, like they have biases. And so when you're using technology in science and in medical interventions, there needs to be an extra oversight. And so the way our model works is it essentially reads a research paper for you and it extracts the key pieces of information. And then what we do is we put it through an assembly line where we have to have PhDs who are experts in that specific field to read that information again, make sure it was accurate. And then the last thing we do, which I think is really important, and I haven't seen in other companies do, is we assign weight to papers. And there's a lot of complexities in the model that we've designed to assign that weight, but in simple forms, a research paper done in mice or done in human clinical trials cannot be weighed the same. So that's just an example of one criteria, but there's a lot of different criteria like that to make sure that we can get as close to the truth as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think one thing that AI probably can't do, unless I'm not aware of it yet, is, extract the clinical relevancy, right? So that's
Yeah,
something that the PhD and actual people, get to
that's
decide,
right.
is this clinically relevant and what do we do with this information?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I love that. So, for those of you listening that are curious about the microbiome, I think this is just such an important topic to get into if you aren't already, doing things with the microbiome with your patients. And if you are looking to heal yourself as well, you may have heard a lot of these things about gut health and leaky gut and the microbiome. And so, like, in really simple terms, I really just want to just cement here what that is. So it's what Linta was saying about the symbiosis is like super important. So truly the human body is not just human cells, right? There's been different figures thrown around. I don't know if you want to tell me what the latest figures are, but it's been estimated that like upwards up to like 90% of cells or 80% may be actually not human cells in our body. And that's because of all this microorganism species that are living and in symbiosis and in harmony within our cells. And it's a two-way street because, like Linta was saying, they provide things to us. They help us metabolize things. They help us produce useful things, including those short chain fatty acids that are now like critically important. And now there's whole therapies consisting of that. And we're, the whole probiotic, prebiotic field has now identified, right? Like what is needed for that balance. So we need to eat food that has prebiotics to feed the good species, the good meaning the beneficial species that do give us beneficial effect, like we were saying, and metabolites for us so that we can be healthier. And then they produce those postbiotics, including short chain fatty acids that and all the other things that Linta was mentioning, including vitamins and neurotransmitters that again help us with our own health. So there's like a mind, body, and gut connection, right? Like it's physical health, mental health, and it's gut health. And those are like the three big pieces to this equation. And so when one of those things is off, you're probably going to have symptoms of one or another. And so as you can see, like your gut, which houses a large percentage of your microbiome and your microorganisms, is a really key area. And this is one of the reasons, and that's why we always talk about gut-brain axis and how, the neurotransmitters are actually made in the gut. And so guess what? The microorganisms are responsible for a lot of what goes on. So it's a really interesting area. And I also want to point it out that it's not just in the gut. There's like microbial species and commensal species, which means they should be there for optimal health. On your skin and on other orifices and other parts of the body. And so it's really important to understand that we are not a sterile body, right? And there's even the brain that was thought to be sterile is now showing that it's not as sterile that we thought it was, right? So
Mhm.
it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you were saying, Marina, around test, don't guess, I think after now having seen like hundreds and hundreds of test results, it's become so apparent to me that if you are treating a client and you're not looking at the microbiome, you are absolutely missing critical information that can make a really big difference in their journeys. And I'll give you a really quick example of that. We had a practitioner who her clinic really focuses on working with patients with pre-diabetes and diabetes. And prior to running into Vitract, she wasn't using gut testing, and now she is almost with all of her clients. But one of the main things is, I'll take one biomarker, for example, is she ran the test for herself and figured out that she had 0% Akkermansia levels. And that is so fascinating to me because when you have a microbial species that's completely been wiped out, there's no dietary intervention that's going to fix that. You literally have to reseed that specific population, and then you can feed it with the right amounts. And so I just think to myself, if you aren't testing your clients for this specific information, a lot of the times, because of like the toxic world that we are living in today, a lot of these key beneficial microbial species are coming back at 0%. And if that's the case, you will never know if you don't test it, meaning you will never be able to fix it in a targeted way, at least, um, if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a baseline, right? To just kind of know where you're starting from. And
Yeah.
so I think it's so amazing that you were able to develop a test with the thinking in mind. And one of your motives was to make it more affordable, right, for people so that they could establish a baseline, they could see what they're starting from. And like you said, the problem with today's world is that there's this like war against things, right? Like there's war on cancer, war on these microbial species that are thought to be not beneficial, either opportunistic or just, harmful, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's also really important to understand that everything is about harmony and balance, right? That's the really holistic thing. So if we are intent on killing, the bad guys, the problem is our antibiotics are not that specific. So we can get somewhat specific sometimes, depending on what antibiotics we're using, there's different spectrums. However, we are also going to be killing pretty indiscriminately and wiping out flora that is beneficial. And then that actually can have overgrowths of those opportunistic bacteria that have like survival mechanisms, like, for example, Clostridium difficile, right? And then that
Yeah.
can become a problem. So the problem is that from a young age, if certain things aren't done, if you're not born vaginally, if there's if you're not breastfed, if all of these things aren't online, and like you said, then there's toxins, and you come into the metropolitan world, and then now we're using hand sanitizer and all kinds of things, and we're kind of not allowing the gut to diversify appropriately, and then that can lead to the disbalance and overgrowth of the potentially not so beneficial bacteria. So that's the whole problem, and the whole key to the balance is diversity, which is what you said in the beginning. So the more diverse, the more you can allow your microbiome to naturally develop and have those key steps happen in your evolution, in your human life experience, the better. And the less antibiotics and the less things that stand in the way of that, also the better. Now, is that realistic for everybody that doesn't live in a remote tribe? Probably not, but we need to be aware of those things so that we can do our best to mitigate for those situations that, we already have no control over. Maybe we already had all those things happen to us that weren't so good. But now we can have a test, we can understand what's out of balance, and we can reseed those species and we can feed them the proper things.
Yeah, and I think, Marina, as you said, it's all about individuality, right? Like some of us, I'll take myself as an example, was a C-section birth. I had maybe like the way my mom describes it is that she's lost count, dozens of antibiotic rounds before the age of 6. So I know for myself that it's going to take me extra effort to take care of my microbiome so that I'm healthy versus somebody else who maybe had the right foundational things in places. And that all comes down to, this is the idea of personalized medicine. We're not all ever going to be equal, but what can we do with our circumstances in life to make sure that we're giving ourselves the opportunity to be the healthiest possible? And I think that was one of the reasons why we really focused on, let's make this test that is this foundational microbiome test that everyone can take at a price that is affordable. So I'll go into that a little bit. Our test retails at $150, which comparatively, tests like this are on the market from anywhere between $400 to $900. And that makes it really hard to, let's talk about it from a practitioner's perspective. Before, practitioners would have to decide between, say you have 100 clients, well, maybe only 10% of your clients can afford that test. So you have to find out a different way to work with the other set of clients without having this insight into what their microbiome looks like. When you introduce an affordable test into your practice, what you could do is you can have different set of tools, right? So you can have a test that's more expensive that maybe shows you other life forms or that maybe serves a different function. But then you can also have a test like this that you can then run for maybe all of your clients, right? And then the really cool thing that we've seen is that's changed the way that practitioners deliver care, because now they know, okay, I'm going to get a stool test and I'm also going to get the health information, sort of health backgrounds, conditions, medications for my clients. And now I have this set of information that I'm always working with. The other thing is that it's been fascinating to me is practitioners are now able to retest. And that's a big deal. It's really hard to ask your client to pay for a $600 test 2 or 3 or 4 times, right? Versus a test like this, you can get a sense of where they are baseline wise, and then you can introduce your protocol, and then you can retest after a couple of months and see if things are moving in the right direction. And if they're not, you can readjust that protocol, right? And that can be totally transformational in the way that you deliver care.
Yeah, I agree. And what would you say as far as a recommendation for how frequently one should test this, or like how long you would need to be on a protocol for either a probiotic to work or like a prebiotic or like a food or lifestyle approach to make a difference in one's microbiome?
Yep. So what we recommend typically is about 3 months. The microbiome has sort of two different ways that it changes. The first way is it can be quite reactive on a day-to-day basis. Say you have a stressful event happen or you eat something that's not so good for you. That's going to change the microbiome a little bit, but the microbiome fundamentally changes on a longitudinal scale. So allowing 2 to 3 months to pass to see if an intervention is actually changing the proportions of the bugs that live in your gut is ample amount of information, and I think sufficient to see if an intervention is working.
Yeah, well, this has been such a fascinating conversation, Linta, and your work and your mission are just amazing that you're able to bring this now to a much larger audience, and practitioners and also patients can order directly for themselves, which I think is amazing as well. So I want to talk to you about applications, right? So what kind of like conditions or symptoms is this test applicable for, right? Because, speaking about the research, anything from like autism to ADHD to like overtly gut related things like gut inflammation, irritable bowel, or even inflammational bowel disease. So tell us about what applications you've seen.
Yeah, we've seen the whole suite really. When there's three different buckets I like to think about this in. One is you have your metabolic conditions like your diabetes, etc. Then you have your neurological, mental health illnesses, and that's one that is really fascinating and interesting. And the last one is GI conditions, and that's obviously the most obvious one. But those are kind of the three different buckets that we see when we stratify different conditions. Again, when it comes down to it, the way you should use this test is as a foundational test. It can give you a really good sense into whether your client is in a dysbiotic state. And if they are, then you can start. So that's, you would look at the first section to figure out what does the state of their microbiome looks like. When you have that information, then you can start to think about there are so many different applications of different areas of health the microbiome touches. It can be anywhere from brain health, skin health, GI health. And so then you can get more tailored into what does my client need. And that's where you would look at the different metabolites that you can glean insight on. Another piece of really interesting information that we have that we make available to our practitioners only, this is not available to clients, is that we show you, say you have a patient that has Crohn's and you get them tested and you come back to us and you say, I'm interested to know what microbial biomarkers I should be looking at. That's when we can give you supplemental information that shows you different biomarkers that correlate with different illnesses. Crohn's, as an example, Blautia is a biomarker that is always, we've seen low, and this has been shown in literature too, but now it's interesting to see it in practice. It's always low in clients that have Crohn's disease. So a low-hanging fruit is looking at that biomarker. If it is low, great. That's an opportunity for you to work on that and sort of upregulate that and see if that improves their symptoms. But this goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of the conversation is we have a good understanding of what different microbial signatures are for different conditions. And we make that available to our practitioners so they can say, okay, when I see a certain signature, I know that this client could be suffering from this condition. The reason we don't make that available information at large is because we don't want this to be used as a purely diagnostic test. This is meant to be a functional test. That doesn't mean that information is not very useful. So we do make it available.
Yeah, I have to say again, I'm really, really impressed with your dashboard. You can even use it as like, an overall dashboard for a client where literally, you can document the lifestyle and the diet, like everything that we talked about and the microbiome.
Yeah.
And then you even extrapolate information to like the neurotransmitters that are supposed to be produced by specific species, right? So it could be really, really targeted depending on what you're specializing in and what you're working on with this client. And then you have the practitioner support calls, which are really, really useful. So, Linta, I want to thank you so much. And I want to invite you for like 1 to 2 minutes of rapid round questions before I let you go.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So, what would be your number one health advice for anybody listening that they could do right now to improve their health?
Eat real foods. Anything that is a real food that's not processed, most likely always good for you.
Love it. Okay, number two, what is your favorite food to eat?
Ooh, mangoes.
Wow. Yeah, it's delicious. I have to say this. The other day I had some mango and I was like, wow, like no processed junk can
Tastes
be
like
better
that.
than just like
Yeah.
a fresh, fleshy mango, like nothing
That's so
compares.
true. It's so good. It smells so good.
Yeah, like you can't compete with what is available naturally that's provided to us by the earth. So, last fun question is tell us like a little fun fact about yourself or what you enjoy doing.
I have a mini Pomeranian. He's a 5 pound dog who is like my sidekick. He's with me all the time, and I spend all my spare time just like outside walking him. I spend a lot of time in the nature. So my pro tip is get a dog, adopt a dog, and you will spend so much more time outdoors than you do with that one.
Yeah, it's so funny. Either pets or kids usually
For
like
kids.
force you to go do something outside and beneficial for yourself. So yeah, definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Linda, thank you once again. And just tell us where people can find more information, maybe set up a call with you or the team, and what special offer you have for the listeners.
Yeah, so if you use Marina 10, that will get you 10% off tests for yourself and your clients. The way to get started is you go on our website, you click on the practitioner tab, and you make an account. Once you make an account, we will reach out to you with the next steps and what to do. Alternatively, there's also actually on our website an opportunity to just book a call with me one-on-one. So you can also feel free to do that. But like Marina was saying, we love interacting with our clinicians. We want to be as helpful as possible. So even today we work with hundreds of clinics, but I know almost everyone from a one-to-one basis. So feel free to get to know us. And yeah, really, really excited to be sharing this with your community.
Yeah, I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And I hope to hear from you soon. And yeah, and best of luck today and the rest of your week. Bye.
Thanks, Marina. Bye.